The fullest expression of collectivism isn't just communism, it's global communism. After all, collectivists don't just want unity in pockets, they want unity across the whole planet. That's the dream, not just peace, but world peace. They want everyone in the whole planet speaking with one voice, acting with one mind, acting in complete sync with one another. Therefore, almost without exception, you will find people in the left trench are globalists. They're trying to bring the whole world together as one single unit. Now again, the barrier to world peace, or at least the world peace as they imagine it, is individualism. There's a quote that's been attributed to Brock Chisholm, the first Director General of the World Health Organization, in which he says, "To achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their individualism, loyalty to family traditions, national patriotism, and religious dogmas." Now this quote's controversial because closer inspection reveals that he never actually said this word for word. Rather, it's more of a paraphrase of an essay that Chisholm wrote in 1946 called The Re-establishment of Peacetime Society. It was after the horrors of World War II that people began dreaming about what world peace might look like. And what Chisholm actually said in this paper is that humanity is being crippled by local certainties, by gods of local moralities, of local loyalty. Therefore, although it's often challenged as being a fake quote, in truth the paraphraser hasn't done a terrible job here. Chisholm was indeed saying that world unity is being crippled by local loyalties or individual loyalties, and that world peace would only be achieved when they were replaced with collective global loyalties or global ideas. Now, globalists have identified three types of individualism or local loyalties that are in particular standing in their way. And these are in regard to religion, nationality, and possessions. You see, globalists believe that as long as people have independent ideas about God, they'll keep fighting about whose concept is true, and there can never be world peace. Therefore, they want a one world global religion. They also believe that as long as people around the world have different national identities, there will always be tribalism and war between states, and there can never be world peace. Therefore, they want a one world political system as well. And finally, as long as people own their own possessions, there will be greed and inequality, and there can never be world peace. Therefore, they want a collectivized economy, that is one akin to communism. Now, if there's an anthem for this era, then it would be John Lennon's Imagine. Released in 1971, the lyrics specifically talk about trying to build a global utopia unburdened by these three particular local loyalties. The lyrics say, "Imagine there's no heaven, it's easy if you try, no hell below us, and above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries, it isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions, I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will live as one." This song encapsulates the globalist sentiment so well that the United Nations released a new version of it in 2014. Indeed, it could almost be considered the United Nations anthem. You'll notice globalists making strong efforts in these three areas in particular then. There are strong attempts to collectivize religion into a one world religion. World religious leaders now regularly attend interfaith conferences that are ultimately designed to blend all of the world religions into one. The United Nations is of course at the center of these efforts with their annual World Interfaith Harmony Week. There's also the G20 Interfaith Forum as well, and there are also many other independent events. These conferences always try to convene religious leaders around the idea that independent truth claims made by each religion doesn't really matter. Truth is unimportant here. What we just really need to agree upon is love. That's the only thing that really matters.
Confío en Buda.
Creo en Dios.
Creo en Jesucristo.
Creo en Dios, Alá.
Muchos piensan distinto, sienten distinto, buscan a Dios o encuentran a Dios de diversa manera. En esta multitud, en este abanico de religiones, hay una sola certeza que tenemos para todos. Todos somos hijos de Dios.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
Creo en el amor.
In terms of nationality, globalists are increasingly advocating for the end of all national borders around the world, and instead they're promoting the idea of global citizenship. In the European Union, there's a project to erase national borders altogether, and to that end, you can now travel quite freely around the continent without having to show a passport at any stage, and its governance is also increasingly centralised in Brussels as well. Globalists love this experiment and are keen to have this rolled out across the entire world. Now, this is why Liberals treated Brexit as such a tragedy back in 2016. For Britain to pull out of the European project and to reassert its national borders and independent identity is, of course, a clear step away from globalism. And for the left then, Brexit is something that they can never accept. They are determined that Brexit must not be a success, lest it encourage other European nations to follow their lead and to reassert their own national sovereignty as well. This is why many globalist politicians have been overheard talking about the need to punish Britain for pulling away. And indeed, to make sure that it doesn't succeed, there are agents of globalism within the UK, within the government and within the institutions who are deliberately trying to thwart and undermine a successful independent UK. There are organisations like No Borders UK who, in their own words, struggle against borders and immigration controls and strive for freedom of movement for all. This is one of the reasons why Liberals have no problems at all with the influx of illegal immigration that we talked about earlier in this series. This is almost a foreshadowing of their dream world, to see all of these people coming in illegally. And the very people who are supposed to be controlling the borders, it turns out, are often these agents working against the whole idea. On the 13th of November 2021, the Director General of the UK Border Force, Paul Lincoln, the man literally in charge of keeping British borders secure, was revealed to be not much of a believer in borders. After doing almost nothing to stop 23,500 plus illegal immigrants from reaching UK shores in 2021 alone, he made an outgoing speech to friends and colleagues saying, "We're all human beings, we're all mammals, we're all rocks, plants, rivers. Beep, borders are just a pain in the beep, beep. People are talking about immigration, emigration, and the rest of the beep thing. It's all beep, beep." In the United States, nothing caused quite as much consternation about Donald Trump's presidency for globalists than the idea that he was going to build a wall along the southern border with Mexico to keep illegal immigrants out. And again, this is all working towards the idea that there should be no national identities at all. There should just be this one world order, this one world political system. And then finally, in terms of possessions, you'll notice that globalists are increasingly experimenting with collectivist economic ideas that cause people to become increasingly dependent on the state. There are a few developments worth mentioning here in particular that are currently getting the left very excited. And I'll start by mentioning Universal Basic Income, or UBI. This is one idea that's currently being toyed with. And it would mean that everyone in society gets an equal monthly handout from the government on which to live, regardless of whether they've worked for it or not. This isn't an entirely new idea, but it is experiencing a resurgence of interest in the postmodern age. Finland, India, Spain, South Korea, Kenya, Germany, and Wales, amongst some others, have recently tested versions of this. Switzerland put it to the vote, but it didn't pass. During COVID-19, the UK government also launched the furlough scheme, which habituated people to the idea of receiving payments direct from the government, specifically for not working. Interestingly, many people decided that once they tasted this life of leisure, staying at home and living off government handouts, they quite liked it. Therefore, the furlough scheme maybe helped to break down some of the resistance that may formerly have existed to such a level of state dependence. There's a theory that in the future, technological advances and automation may mean that there simply aren't enough paid work positions for every human being on Earth. Because of computers and automation and machine, there just won't be enough jobs for human beings to do. If that were to transpire, the obvious question would then become, well, how will the economy work? What will we humans actually do with ourselves? How would we occupy our time? Because at the moment, most of us spend most of our time working. Many predict a future whereby the government would simply issue everyone in the world with a monthly universal basic income on which to live. A UBI is especially appealing for collectivists when they consider that the technology now exists to implement it as part of a cashless society. At the time of making the series, something called Central Bank Digital Currency, or CBDC, is being developed. And the exciting part for globalists is that such digital currency would be programmable. In other words, governments could control where, when, how, and if that money was spent. According to the official Monetary and Financial Institutions Forum, 60% of banks are already experimenting with this technology. They say programmable money is designed with inbuilt rules that constrain the user. These rules can mean that money expires after a fixed date, or its use is restricted to certain sets of goods. So what if the government holds all of the wealth in the world and it just distributes it equitably each month, and then that which hasn't been spent expires so that no individuals can hoard more than someone else? What if it means that nobody can keep a separate supply in a biscuit tin under the bed, or invest in things that grow their own wealth beyond that of others? Lefty globalists love this idea. Indeed, this system has all the ingredients that a leftist desires: enforced equality, dependence on the state, and authoritarian control baked right in to that system. The leftist excitement only increases when they consider that you could easily build a social credit system into programmable money. In other words, people could be rewarded for collectivist behaviors that sort of conform to state rules and state wishes and desires, but then punished for individualistic ones. If somebody behaves as the government desires, they may release extra credit to your account for good behavior, but then if somebody rebels, the government could withhold or block that person from spending, thus effectively shutting them out of society. And through this, people could be trained into obedience and subservience, a bit like animals, really. The World Economic Forum, established in 1971, is a leading part of this effort to create this world without possessions. Every year, the richest and most powerful people in the world come together at the forum to talk about how they're going to shape the future. And in recent times, they've infamously begun talking about the need for a great reset, the complete deconstruction of the current economic system, and another one built along globalist lines. They infamously said this in 2016. The obvious question here is, if we won't own our own things, then who will we be renting them from? Who is going to own all of this stuff? And the most obvious answer is the state. The World Economic Forum has been very explicit about this plan for a Great Reset. Sometimes people refer to this as being a mere conspiracy, but the World Economic Forum have been absolutely open about what their aims for the future are. They're not even trying to hide what they're trying to do.
Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight the severe virus, but to shape the system.
To make it so that history would look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset.
The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. It is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate, and rebalance our world. Rebalancing investment, harnessing science and technology, and advancing the transition to net zero emissions, all elements of the Great Reset, are fundamental to building the future we need.
We have to change our economies dramatically in the next 20 or 30 years, and the next 10 years is absolutely decisive.
We have to live up to the expectations which we have created, and we will do so.
Klaus Schwab, the head of the WEF, has boasted in the past about how his agents have penetrated governments and institutions all around the world, following the strategy of Rudi Dutschke. Remember how he recommended the long march through the institutions as a way of taking hold and controlling change in society. Well, the WEF have a training program called Young Global Leaders. It was launched in 1993 under the name Global Leaders for Tomorrow. Through this program, they train up candidates according to their ideology and then insert these agents into governments and institutions all around the world.
And I have to say, when I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum. Mm-hmm. But what we are very proud of now is the young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina and so on. that we penetrate the cabinets. So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
And that's true in Argentina too. Wow.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's true in Argentina as well.
It's true in Argentina, and it's true in France now. I'm with the president, who is a young global leader.
This is a list of just some of the leaders who have been through the Young Global Leaders program and who, in Klaus Schwab's terms, have penetrated the cabinets and governments of the world. We're talking prime ministers and presidents and people in some of the most influential positions in the world. This is no mere conspiracy. This is real life we're talking about here. Now, occasionally though, globalists will reveal a little bit too much too soon. We're heading down this path, but sometimes they get a bit impatient or they overestimate just how ready we are for their utopian nightmare. So when they told people in 2016, for example, that they would own nothing and be happy, it caused such a storm of protest that it was removed from YouTube and they issued an apology. So if there's a bit of a furor, they will tend to roll back a little bit to let some more time pass before trying to advance their plan. It's a bit like the end of Back to the Future, when Marty McFly plays Johnny B. Good at the school dance. When the crowd recoils with horror, he says,
"Guess you guys aren't ready for that yet. But your kids are gonna love it."
This is what the globalists believe, that it's just a matter of time. Maybe this generation doesn't want to give up our faith in God or our national identity or our capitalist economic system, but it's gonna happen one day because our kids are gonna love it. Or maybe even their kids or their kids or their kids, but however long it takes and whichever generation it is, they're sure that there will eventually be a generation who will embrace this vision wholeheartedly. And for that reason, they'll keep on testing the waters and pushing the boundaries every now and then to see where we are and to see if we're ready for it. A one world religion, no borders, no possessions, choreographed by a one world government. And I believe they could be right. I mean, I think they're gonna get their wish here. If the trench theory is correct, and it is a big if, then as the postmodern age develops, then theoretically it makes sense that we're gonna have to confront and face off against a far left ideology at some point on this trajectory. You see, if we accept that the culmination of the modern age was the far right, that is Nazis and fascism, and that makes sense according to this theory, then the culmination of the postmodern age should theoretically be the rise of the far left. And tellingly, and unfortunately, our generation has a blind spot here. You see, if you mention the phrase far right to this generation, that instantly triggers a negative reaction. It's got this pejorative connotation, and rightly so. They know that Nazis, fascism, racism, and all the rest, Hitler, that was terrible. It's right that they know that. But if you say that the far left or communism to this generation, if you say those phrases, the horrors of that ideology just doesn't resonate with them in the same way. And indeed, in our age, a lot of people are actually convinced that communism's the answer. It's the answer for utopia. You see, I think the problem is that people saw the far right and they got scared and thought, well, the answer must be as far away from that as possible. So we're going to rush headlong in the opposite direction into the far left. Love is all you need, unity at all costs. But the truth is that communism and the far left has killed more people and caused more misery to human beings than any other ideology in the history of the world. We're talking hundreds of millions of people dead and hundreds of millions more living in misery because of the far left. And we're talking authoritarianism and enslavement and dehumanization. But this is really the whole trench theory distilled down. That if we had to witness the rise of the far right before we course corrected, then we'll likely have to witness the rise of the far left in future before we course correct again. Now, maybe we'll pull back before we reach that extreme point, and I certainly hope we do. But we're already in a pretty extreme place. When the left are saying that 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4, and men can be women and women can be men, and street preachers are being arrested for preaching the Bible, and police are phoning people to check their thinking, and hate speech bills are being drafted, and cancel culture means that you can't speak the truth in public without being completely destroyed and having your income and life taken away. We're already in quite an extreme place right now. But anyway, let's keep on walking through this path. Let's see where this leads. Let's keep extrapolating to see what will happen if we continue on this trajectory.